Welcome to From the Tower After Dark. We're the show that, digs into the sources to pull out the key insights, giving you that shortcut to getting up to speed. Today, we're tackling a pretty big historical misunderstanding, one that's been around for ages, actually. Did you know lots of people thought Martin Luther, the Martin Luther, father of the Protestant Reformation, absolutely despised the pipe organ, like wanted it gone from churches entirely. It's this myth that just refuses to die. I have with me today Laurie Stanford, a colleague from the old school days who jumped at the chance to start this series with me about the origins and scandal of the organ in the early church.
It really is stubborn, isn't it?
So this deep dive, we're going to unpack what Luther really felt about music and, specifically about the pipe organ. We'll clear up that old story and show you a much more interesting picture, I think. And our guide for this is a really solid piece of research. Theo Van Wyck's 2017 paper, Martin Luther and the Pipe Organ, His True Sentiments Affirmed. Van Wyck does a great job looking at Luther's own words and crucially how his thinking sort of shifted over the years. So let's dig in. Okay, Martin Luther, we think theologian, Reformation guy, but music. Did he even have a musical side? Because, to hate something like a pipe organ, you'd almost think he must have been tone deaf or something.
Oh, completely the opposite, actually. Luther was deeply musical. Seriously, he wasn't just a listener. He played instruments quite well. Apparently, the lute was his thing. And he composed music, too. Had a decent tenor voice. Sources like Peach, Lever, Routley, they all confirm this. He really understood music, not just the notes, but the sort of theological side of it, too. He didn't just like music. He saw it as this incredible, divine gift from God. There's this famous quote from 1538 in his intro to Dorgra's Symphonia Jugend. He says, let me get this right in Summa, next to the word of God. The noble art of music is the greatest treasure in the world. He goes on, it controls our thoughts, minds, hearts, and spirits. And he wasn't messing around. He added that anyone who doesn't see music as this amazing creation, well, he called them a quad hopper who does not deserve to be called a human being and should only listen to donkeys braying and pigs grunting.
Wow, okay, he really, really valued music then. That's a pretty strong language, which makes it even weirder that this idea of him hating the organ got started. How could someone who felt that strongly about music end up being accused of wanting to ban this, majestic instrument? Where did the myth come from?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? And it seems the roots are tangled up in the wider Reformation context. The organ did get a bad rap, absolutely, but it was mostly other reformers, especially later during the Calvinist period. They were the ones calling it the devil's bagpipe or the Pope's bagpipe. They saw it as, just another piece of the Roman Catholic ceremony they wanted to ditch entirely. And that's where Luther gets dragged in kind of unfairly. There's this quote that gets passed around, supposedly Luther saying the organ in worship is the ensign of Baal. Sounds pretty damning, right? But here's the kicker. Scholars, including Van Wyck in the paper we're looking at, they've looked everywhere, high and low, in all of Luther's writings, and guess what? They can't find it. It just doesn't seem to be something he actually said or wrote. It looks like a total fabric. That just sort of caught on.
Whoa. Okay. So the main quote used to prove he hated organs. He never even said it. That's huge. But hang on. Wasn't there some truth to it? Did he make any critical comments about organs? Especially early on.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. He did make some critical remarks, particularly around 1519, 1521, 1522. That's definitely documented. For instance, he once compared prayers that weren't sincere to lead organ pipes, which barely draw or shut, put out their sounds in church, yet lack both words and meaning. And another time he criticized monks for sounding forth like those pipe organs. And he did lump organs in with other Catholic practices he called superfluous histrionics. But look at the timing. This was all right at the start of the Reformation before he'd really reshaped the church services in Wittenberg the way he wanted them. His criticism wasn't aimed at the organ as an instrument. It was about how it was being used in some Catholic rites back then, maybe in a showy way, a non-theological way, as Van Wyck puts it, or just, improperly. His issue was with the practice, the performance, not the pipes themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that completely changed the context. So it wasn't organs are bad. It was more like stop using organs like that.
Right.
And you said his views evolved, so these early comments weren't his final word. How did his thinking change?
Precisely. His core theology was solid, but he was open about growing and understanding. He actually said something like, I did not learn my theology all at once. My temptations took me deeper. He wasn't static. And this is where he really stands apart from some other big names of the Reformation. Think Zwingli, think Calvin. They often took a sort of a slash and burn approach to anything linked to the Catholic Church. If Rome did it, it was out. Luther was different, more maybe pragmatic. He felt that forms of worship were okay as long as they didn't clash with the New Testament. It wasn't about throwing everything out. I mean, look at Zwingli. He was a musician himself, trained and everything, but he literally approved smashing up organs in churches, saw them as idols. Luther never went there, not even close. That's a really important distinction.
That's a massive difference. So given Luther liked music generally and his views were evolving, did he actually, hear good organs, meet good organists? Did he have experiences that might have reinforced a more positive view?
Oh, definitely. And that's a big piece of the puzzle Van Wyck highlights. Think about his life journey from his school days in places like Mansfeld and Eisenach as a monk in Urfort, and later setting up shop in Wittenberg. He was around church music, including organs. Constantly, the main church in Wittenberg had an organ, and Frederick the Wise, the guy who founded the university there and was Luther's protector, he hired top-tier musicians like the really famous Austrian organist Paul Hoffamer worked for him. Luther would have certainly heard him play. You can't be around that kind of quality and not, notice it. And then there's this big trip he took in 1510. He went down to Rome. On the way, he stopped in cities like Nuremberg and Innsbruck, places known for their music and impressive instruments. Imagine him in Inns hearing the organ in the St. Jacob Church. It was apparently this amazing Venetian-style instrument. Someone traveling around then, Antonio Debus, wrote about it. He described its sound. Get this, like trumpets, fifes, flutes, cornets, crumb horns, bagpipes, drums, and the songs of various birds. Purest tone, he said. It's incredible sounding.
Wow, that sounds like a synthesizer from the 1500s. You hear something like that, especially if you love music?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard to imagine thinking, let's get rid of these. Yeah. What about the people playing them? Did he know organists? Respect them?
Yes, he did. He worked with them and clearly held them in high regard. People like Johannes Weinmann in Wittenberg, Wolfgang Duckstein in Strasbourg, who was key in getting Lutheran hymns going, by the way. And there's this really touching story, actually, a letter Luther wrote in the 1530s to an organist named Matthias Weller, who is feeling down, depressed. Luther tells him, basically, when you're sad, go to your regal organ. That's a small type of organ. Strike the keys, start singing to Christ. If the devil bothers you to get lost because you need to play and sing for the Lord.
I mean, does that sound like someone who hates organs? It sounds like someone who deeply gets the spiritual, even therapeutic power of playing music on that instrument.
That's beautiful. Actually, really human. Shows he saw the organ as a tool for spiritual well-being, not some evil thing.
And wasn't there even more direct proof? Stuff written down by people who knew him well?
Yep. His own student, Erasmus Albert, wrote flat out in 1556, "The noble art of the painter and organ is loved by Luther," pretty clear, and maybe the most telling piece of evidence comes from Luther himself in 1541. He gave a German Bible as a gift to an organist, Wolf Heitz, and inside he wrote this inscription praising organs and whatever other beloved musical instruments there are. And then he calls them recently invented and given by God, of which neither David nor Solomon, neither Persia, Greece, nor Rome knew anything. Think about that. He's not just tolerating it, he's celebrating the organ as a modern God-given invention, a step beyond even the Old Testament instrument.
Okay, that seals it for me. He clearly didn't hate it. He thought it was a gift from God, a new innovation even. So putting it all together, how did the organ actually function in his redesigned church services? Was it just background music, or did it have a real role?
It had a very real integrated role. Luther's Reformed liturgy wasn't about stripping music out, quite the opposite. It included lots of music, vocal and instrumental, And yes, organ music was part of that. We know that by 1525, the plans for the main church in Wittenberg, the Schloss-Kirche, specifically included using the organ in certain parts of the service. It wasn't an afterthought. A common way it was used with something called alternatum. This is where the organ would play a verse, then the choir or congregation would sing a verse back and forth. It's actually an old practice, goes back to the 1400s. It's important to remember, though, the organ playing along with the congregation while they sing like hymns today, that came much later, mid-600s, really. So in Luther's time, it had this specific, often alternating liturgical job.
Right? So it had its own distinct voice in the service interacting with the singers. That really paints a picture of his approach. And just to contrast again, this was totally different from what Zwingli and Calvin were doing, right?
Yeah, totally different. While Luther is finding ways to use the organ meaningfully, you've got Zwingli and Calvin leading movements that are literally pulling organs out of churches, silencing instruments, seeing them as symbols of the old Catholic ways they were rejecting. Her focus was much more on purging those elements. Luther's was more about reforming and repurposing what could be used for genuine worship according to his theology. And there's that killer piece of evidence. Remember when Luther was away at the Diet of Worms in 1521, that big meeting? While he was gone, one of his colleagues back in Wittenberg, Karlstadt, he actually went ahead and banned the organ, took advantage of Luther's absence. But what happened when Luther got back? He overturned it. He brought the organ back into the church services. That single action speaks volumes about where he really stood. He actively chose to keep it.
Wow. He literally had to reverse a ban put in place by his own side. That's incredibly telling. Yeah. So let's bring this home. We've gone through all this history, busted the myth. Why does this matter today? What's the takeaway for us now thinking about church music?
I think it matters a lot, actually, because you still hear echoes of this, right? Arguments that maybe organs are, I don't know, too Catholic or just too old-fashioned for today's worship. Understanding Luther shows that one of the most important reformers, a guy who turned the world upside down, didn't just toss out tradition wholesale. He saw value in existing musical tools like the organ. He adapted it, sure, made sure it served a theological purpose, helped the congregation participate, but he didn't reject it just because it was old or had been used by the Catholic Church. It counters that simplistic idea that reform always means throwing things away. Luther shows us reform can also mean taking something powerful like the organ and finding its right place in worship that speaks to people. His focus was on purposeful use, not just the instrument itself.
That's a really valuable perspective. It's not just about history. It's about how we approach tradition and change even now. So to sum up, Martin Luther, far from an organ hater, he loved music deeply. Saw the organ as a divine gift when used right. Yeah, he had criticisms early on, but they were about misuse. His later actions, his writings, his relationships with organists, they all point to him supporting and integrating the organ into his vision for reformed worship. He really stood apart from other reformed formers on this, which leads to a question for you listening. What musical myths or traditions have you run into? Maybe in your own church or community. Things that, like Luther and the organ, might have a history that's totally different from what people assume. Something to think about. See you next time we tackle the Great Pipes for Speakers debate. Laurie, I'd like to thank you for taking time to stop by the tower and chat with us about the myths and legends surrounding the instrument we love so much.
Hey, my pleasure. When did we last connect? I think it was the Organ Festival in Montreal, I believe.
It sure was. That super hot and humid evening at Notre Dame downtown. I certainly hope you'll join us again as we continue to unpack the mystery and fascination of the King of Instruments. I'm your host, Joe, and for Laurie Stanton, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll make it happen, right here on From the Tower After Dark.